than my list of opportunities. But I do have an interesting opportunity at the end. So first of all, I want to highlight the risk aversion that you see in the private sector, and I want to link that to the approval process that we see in Article 6.2 in particular, and I expect in 6.4. When I worked in the private sector in the CDM days, I was quite taken aback by how ruthless private sector investors were. And if you presented, because we had trouble in those days in getting the host country left for approval, and when you look now at the approval processes for Article 6.2, going forward through 10 or 15 stages, cross-ministerial committee meetings, and so on, and all of this with either the risk of removal or cancellation of the authorization and maybe a stop date at the end of the NDC period with uncertainty about whether that's going to be renewed. That will be a major barrier for private sector investment into projects because, put that into practical terms, it's maybe going to take you 2 or 3 years to get your project up and running. That could be 2027 before you're actually generating any credits, and then the NDC period comes to an end in 2030, and is it going to be renewed or not? You don't know. So I think that's a major issue that needs to be taken into consideration. The impact of commoditization of credits. This was what really drove the carbon, the CDM markets away from Africa and to China, India, and Brazil. And I know this because in the company I worked for at the time, our motto was to be the Saudi Arabia of the carbon world. We wanted to produce the stuff at $2 and sell it at 20. And that's rational private sector actor doing that. And if you put up any barriers or things are harder to do, then you scare away that investment. And it's very difficult to take an instrument like the Article 6.2 and all these great words about people saying, we want to invest in good projects, but when it comes down to the line, it's money that's being paid, and the private sector is very careful with where they spend their money. So that's a very big lesson that we learned. Another challenge we had, and I think this still persists, is the time gap between developing your project and getting your revenues. And of course, in the CDM, this led to the aggregator model, where there were plenty of aggregators who would buy forward purchase emission reductions from project developers at $2, $3, and then aggregate them all up and sell them on at $20, $30. But they would provide the finance for the project. And I heard a statistic, and I didn't note down where I got it from, so I'm only sort of quoting it third hand. It was at the World Bank PMI conference we had in Rwanda, and there somebody said that something like 70 or 80% of African project developers only ever develop one carbon project because they don't make any money from it. They develop it, they have to forward sell their credits, they do their project, and that's it. The money is made somewhere else. So this kind of financing challenge is, and that's something that the African Development Bank could be in a position to step in to do that. I have sent a proposal up to my management to see if we could take something like that forward. There's definitely a role to provide project finance to help African project developers benefit from the sales price of the emission reductions. And the next one I want to highlight is the distortive impact of non-CO2 abatement projects, because we saw in the CDM and in the slides from Emma how big the impact of some of those projects was. And we need to deal with that somehow, and I do have a suggestion for that. But otherwise, we may see situations where there are some abatement projects that are highly profitable and yield large numbers of emission reductions, and we need to find some way of sort of addressing those and trying to level the playing field. And then there's a very important issue that arises as we transition from CDM to Article 6 in the Paris Agreement. In the CDM, governments were happy to sign letters of agreement or authorization because what they were giving away, the emission reduction units, were of no value to the host country. The CDM didn't require host countries to do anything. The Paris Agreement does. And in that process, it means that emissions and emission reductions are sovereign assets. And there has to be equity about who accesses and who has the right to sell these emission reductions, and how do citizens or taxpayers of the host country benefit from that. And if we don't have that transparency, and some of these things turn up in a parliament somewhere and somebody says, oh, do you know it's the president's brother-in-law who's selling those, then it's going to significantly damage the credibility of this instrument. So there must be equity and transparency in the processes that allow the sale of these units to take place, and there has to be benefits for the host country. So these are some of the lessons that I picked up from the CDM and that I'm aware of as we move into Article 6. And now, what's the opportunity? And sorry, I have a completely different solution to that, and it is Article 6.8. It is non-market approaches, because so many of the challenges and the problems that we're seeing coming up with Article 6.2 and 6.4 are related to the market-based approach, the commoditization, the trading, the speculation in these units. If you adopt a non-market approach, then all of those issues go away. Now, we have an instrument, and I won't go into it in detail here, it's called the Adaptation Benefits Mechanism, and it's an extremely interesting, the more I've worked on it, the more I've learned about the potential benefits of moving away from a market-based approach and creating non-fungible, we call them certified adaptation benefits, which we propose that governments, corporates and consumers purchase and surrender and report in the transparency framework as evidence of their contribution towards stated adaptation needs in developing countries. Now, there's no reason why you couldn't do that for mitigation, and there is perhaps a specific window to do that for non-CO2 mitigation projects, so that you take the non-CO2 out of the carbon market and deal with them through a non-market-based approach, and it's effectively a marginal financing process. The process is you say, how much money do you need to make this project work? And then you provide that amount of money. And it's not the units or the certificates that come out of it aren't tradable, and they don't go into that speculative model. So lots of interesting stuff there to talk about. And you can see more about the adaptation benefit mechanism at abmechanism.org. I'm happy to talk about it more. Thank you very much.
Well, that was really fantastic, and really appreciate you got a lot in. I'm trying to catch up in the short amount of time, but this is really great. I mean, you obviously had such a great experience coming from the private sector into the African Development Bank, working with countries, and time again, you said leveling the playing field. And I think that's really, really important. And that comes back to the rules of the game, the rules of the game. And this whole challenge of the sovereign assets, and we're seeing this now about governments wanting to tax them, who owns the, you're cleaning the air, you're taking carbon, you're preventing carbon going to the air, or you're removing carbon from the air. Private sector people are doing it, communities are doing it, but they're assets that the sovereign owns. So I think that really is a good segue to you, Perumal. I mean, it really is. The pressure's on at UNFCCC, and everyone's saying, why is it taking so long? And I think we've heard why it's taking so long, but wonderful work that you're doing there. And maybe if you can tell us some key takeaways, where are you at in the UNFCCC on the Article 6?